in Nairobi to go live as soon as possible.
Okay. I'll just like to introduce you to our moderator. Ms.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Bonjour. Hello.
Can you just introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hello. I'm ready to begin the session. So.
We're going to begin in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello to all, Your Excellency. Is all our guests in the rendezvous?
I think we're all here except for Minister Pisano, who couldn't make it because she got called into an emergency cabinet meeting.
Okay. Then we begin. Donc, hello to all your. Dear experts, panelists present with us in this meeting, I'm truly honored to meet you, and it's a great pleasure to be able to animate this debate in your company, to be able to make this exchange that I hope that it is above all for humanity. I would like, dear guests, Your Excellency, Madam Minister, she's not present with us, panelists, to be able to speak to you in my native language, in the Arabic language, since we are in a meeting of the United Nations, the best human place to allow exchanges between all humanity. That is why I will make the introduction of our debates in this session in Arabic. And I say, في حالة الطوارئ كمثل هذه التي نعيشها اليوم وكمثل الكوارث الطبيعية المختلفة وغيرها من أشكال الكوارث تتأثر وبصفة قطعية حياة الناس في كل مكان مهما اختلفت الثقافات. كوكبنا يتأثر أيضا من هذه الكوارث، وخاصة بعض الجوانب الحساسة من حياة البشر والمتعلقة بنشاطهم الإنساني بالدرجة الأولى، فتتأثر وقد تتوقف تماما جوانب كثيرة من الحياة المعتادة والتي قد تبدو عادية، فيصبح الناس غير قادرين على العمل. وعلى سبيل المثال المدارس تضطر إلى الإغلاق، والمؤسسات الثقافية أيضا يمكنها أن تتأثر، حيث تصبح غير متاحة أو تفقد إمكانياتها في اقتراح أعمال إبداعية، كما هو الحال بالنسبة لما تمر به مختلف البلدان عبر العالم جراء جائحة كوفيد-19. بيئتنا الشاملة يمكن أن تتغير في هذه الظروف غير المسبوقة، ولكن قوة التكنولوجيا الرقمية تبين أنه حتى في الأوقات الأزمة الوقتية أو الدائمة يمكن للناس الاستمرار في الازدهار. وعلى سبيل المثال الأشكال التقليدية للتعليم أو الانتقال إلى العمل الرقمي إلى غير ذلك من النشاطات الجديدة والمتجددة لفضل العلوم والتكنولوجيا. وهذه الدورة سوف تنظر في الأدوار التي يمكن أن تلعبها التكنولوجيا الرقمية والابتكار الرقمي في التنمية الاجتماعية وبمختلف الجوانب مثل التعليم، الزراعة والصناعة على سبيل المثال لا الحصر، وكذلك في خصوصيات الإدماج الرقمي وتطوير السياسات الرقمية التضامنية القائمة. وكان لابد من طرح هذه الأسئلة على العالم أجمع وقد جاء موعدها. Allow me now, after this introduction, to present our honorable guests who will take part with us in the debate of this session around the chosen theme. I begin with Mrs. Pumzile Mlambo Neguka from the United Nations Women Executive Director. Hello. Mr. Yong Lee from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, the Director General.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm very glad to meet you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, she's the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Science from the UNESCO.
Hello.
Hello.
Great to see you.
I'm glad to see you and to meet you too. Mr. Mario Simoli from the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Deputy Executive Secretary. I'm glad to meet you. Is Mr. Simoli with us? Yes.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure is for me too. And Mr. Andrew Sullivan from ISOC. Hey, are you with us?
I am. Pleasure to meet you.
Glad to meet you too. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Jos Calmer. That's all right?
Hi, yes, you got it. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me too. You are the head of global public policy and government relations. That's right?
That's right.
Okay,
For
I'm
Zoom.
glad to meet you.
Thank you.
Mr. Really Lapalainen.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you too. You're the Director of Sustainable Development. FINGO, Sustainable Development. I'm glad to meet you too. And Mrs. Claire Melamed from Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, the data.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to meet you too. And before we begin, I just want to set the scene for the discussion ahead. We are going to ask our speakers to give a very specific example of how the internet or related technology has been used in support of social cohesion in times like COVID-19, or a specific example of how the internet has empowered vulnerable groups. And please try to find examples from the real world, something that has happened and that stand out as an example. And I begin with Mrs. Fumzila Malombo Nguka. Please begin.
Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the panelists. The one example that I would like to pick up that has been important for us during this time of the COVID-19 Shendo pandemic of violence against women, and an example that is important for a large number of women in the world, given that the increase of violence against women in the midst of the shadow pandemic is something that has been felt by women all over the world. The violence increased up to 40% in some parts of the world. So we have seen the importance of instant messaging services with a geolocation function, where women can send the message about their situation and ask for help in a discreet way without the observation of the abuser. The Secretary General and ourselves sent messages to member states to create the hotline in those countries, and 145 countries responded positively, but not all of them obviously worked optimally. But I want to highlight, for instance, the response that we got in a collaboration with Twitter in a campaign that is called There's Help campaign. Countries such as Thailand, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, and Vietnam, people there, the women there used the service very much, and they were able to report violence against them and to get services back. But for all the countries in the world, we have provided a portal of where you can get information about what services are available in your country. That portal is housed by Facebook for us, which means that therefore anywhere in the world, you can have access to that information, and it will tell you where services are available in your country. But the caution I will make is that the majority of women in the world still don't have smartphones and are not connected. We need solutions that are viable for women who do not have these kinds of services, who have feature phones and who are not connected in the internet. And I would like to hear more if some of you have got suggestions for us along those lines.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mrs. Fumzil Malombo Nguka. And now I want to go to Mr. Yong Lee. Just in 1 minute, please.
1 minute.
It's just to give us just one example. We don't get into the heart of the debate. It's just an introduction. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I think UNIDO is a specialized agency on the industrial development to support SDG Goal 9. So two things here. Pandemic gave us big challenge. Now we actually applied some of the innovative way to use digitalization technology for PPE production and also waste management treatment, and also the how to tracing those patients, and also create some of the innovative way to identify the chain of the infections. Those are very widely applied. Second is example is we use digital technology to support production manufacturing, especially in agriculture sector. Like agro, they use drone system, use Internet of Things for the geothermal project management, operational management. And at the same time, we also develop innovative way for educational purposes, because virtual training, visual reality training is so powerful, connected to any corner of the world, no matter it's located in the remote area or the city center. This is a kind of training platform we created for them. And finally, is social inclusion. As my colleague from UN Women mentioned, that the most vulnerable group, women and also young people, women, because they usually work in the textile garment industry, will be mostly affected by the new technology connected to the digitalization or so. That is why we create a special program for this kind of trainings for women entrepreneurs and women to get knowledge, to upskill their technology, to find the job, to meet the job opportunities, young people at the same time. So we are continuing this innovative approach. We believe this is a very daunting task for us, for all the international community. We would like to work with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the example for Mrs. Gabriela Ramos. I just need to ask you to respect the time. Just 1 minute, so more.
Very
A little
fast.
more, a little more.
Great to be with all of my friends in this panel. Let me tell you that UNESCO, which is of course the institution that is related to education, science, communication, and resources for internet, we are very worried about the disinformation that has been inundating the networks and the false data that has been also distributed. And therefore, we have launched a campaign with the European Union to counter this disinformation using the same tools that those that spread conspiracy theories using hashtag things before sharing. And I think it has a very good impact in terms of countering the lack of a substantive basis to share information that is not true. But we also have an open education resources networks of fact checkers, media and information literacy resources to counter the spread of this disinformation, and using the internet for good, because what we are trying to advance is informing the real issues that are related to the COVID spread, the real issues in terms of economic and social impact, and the real issues related to the good use of internet in this current situation. And finally, we are, of course, I will talk about this later, we are advancing on the elaboration of a recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence that I think will provide for very good basis on all these issues.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gabriela. And now to Mr. Mario Simoli. We're hearing you. Mr. Mario Simoli.
Hola, ¿me escuchan? Gracias. Voy a dar dos ejemplos que nos parecen importantes y que estamos discutiendo en la nueva reunión ministerial que se va a tener en CEPAL y preparando la acción con los ministros de la región de toda América Latina. El primero tiene que ver, las crisis esta golpeó muchísimo a lo que se define el sector informal de la economía. Es un sector que ha sido fuertemente golpeado, que la gente ha quedado marginada, sin trabajo, y es muy difícil acceder a los subsidios, a las necesidades, porque son empresas que existen y no existen, están y no están, es un tema. Entonces, aquí las plataformas digitales, vía celulares, permiten tener un contacto y una relación directa con todas las personas del sector informal, que siendo las más golpeadas, es muy importante, incluso para subsidiar y para garantizar, por ejemplo, un ingreso básico para que puedan sobrevivir durante la crisis, o al menos hasta que en algún modo los mercados económicos se activen. Por lo tanto, el primer ejemplo es el acceso y las plataformas para poder llegar a los sectores informales, que en la economía de América Latina llegan a un 50%. El segundo punto que estamos trabajando es lo que se llama la posibilidad que los accesos a las plataformas con una jerarquía que no las deprima y no las condicione las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Las pequeñas y medianas empresas ocupan el 80% del empleo en América Latina. Y para poder vender sus productos, sus acciones, necesitamos plataformas que en algún modo manejen política de competencia, política de regulación. Y esto lo estamos trabajando a nivel de gobierno. Estas son propuestas que en algún modo nos permiten debatir, llevar la atención y hacer de lo digital algo positivo. Cuidado, porque lo digital no siempre es positivo. Muchas veces genera, por ejemplo, como en el teletrabajo y en la teleeducación, un fuerte golpe a los sectores más vulnerables. En América Latina, más de 36 millones de niños no pueden acceder a una plataforma digital para la teleeducación. Y por lo tanto, cuando uno dice cómo estudia esto, también tiene que saber los problemas estructurales para poder poner soluciones. Pero esos son dos ejemplos que pueden ser realmente positivos y mucho tienen que ver con el desarrollo. Gracias.
I think we lost you.
There is some problem in the connection.
Now you are with us. Yes, please.
Yes. We continue the session?
Yes, please.
Okay, okay. And now I want to talk to Mr. Sullivan to give us her example. Firstly, in introduction.
Sure. So we're in actually an example right now. Thank you very much. We're actually having an example of the sort of thing that the internet allows us to do despite the fact of pandemic. But I want to give a different example. This week, I had the terrible misfortune, a colleague of mine from a few years ago died very suddenly, young man, and his family is spread all over the place. And, you know, the travel restrictions that are a necessary fact that we're facing today are meant that they couldn't come together for the funeral, which was in Ottawa in Canada. So, you know, we used the internet. We gathered virtually. It was not the same thing, of course. It's not the same. But it gives us the ability to reach out and to try to restore some sort of normalcy in an era that is extraordinarily challenging for every person. So I think it's really important to remember that this is the kind of thing that we can get from the internet, an advantage that we just didn't have in any other period of our lives. If this had happened, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it would have just been devastating. Nobody could have reached one another. Nobody could have shared, their reminiscences of my colleague. And it was very affecting. And I think that this is something that we must remember. The internet does provide us with these opportunities that we just didn't have otherwise.
Thanks very much for this efficient example. And now I want to ask the same question to give us an example to Mr. Aruneba Ghosh. Mr. Aruneba Ghosh, are you with us in this meeting?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I don't have the possibility to see you on screen. Where are you?
I'm here. I can see you. I can see everyone else. I don't know.
Okay. What are your examples in this context?
Yeah. So I'll just give two examples. One is at a national level, the introduction of an app called Arogya Setu, which was downloaded by 100 million people in the first 40 days as a contact tracing app. That was introduced in April. Now, of course, there were issues or concerns raised about the kind of whether too much information about individuals was being taken or whether all the bugs had been fixed, etc. But at least it gives you an idea of the scale that can be reached very quickly in a country like India. But at the other end, from a civil society point of view, in India, several crowdsourcing platforms like Keto, Milap, Rangde, etc., have helped individuals raise funds for several causes to support vulnerable communities. And in many scenarios, these platforms had to spend much more through their service fees than what they made through it. And during the pandemic, they've been able to make these platforms available for free. Again, it demonstrates that if we are able to democratize access to the internet and related services, we can then try to make sure that there are sufficient channels by which the vulnerable could be reached. In India, in fact, access to the internet the cost of access to the internet is in fact the cheapest in the world, according to Forbes. But that doesn't mean everyone has access to the internet, but it again demonstrates that this is a tool that has to be used as widely as possible, especially when there is physical disconnection.
Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. And now I go to Mr. Rili Lapalian. We're waiting for your example, concrete example. Is Mr. Lapalian with us in this meeting?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I try to be very, very concrete. I'm taking the example what exactly the Finnish university students got the idea when they wanted to really connect about the technology and the education and then really have the global perspective on that. They created Code Bus Africa, which they brought together the African and the Finnish innovators in the technology and education. And the Code Bus inspires the youth to discover and make use of the technologies in their lives and empower especially the girls to explore technology possibilities for their future. And the bus concretely went to the different African countries. It was supported by the Finnish embassies in different African countries. And practically, they collect young people, different ages in the schools, also in the youth clubs, in the places where the youth exist. And they gave the access for the kids to play the computers, learn skills for simple coding. And that exactly the project reached altogether 1,900 young people in 10 countries. And it's been extremely interesting exercises. And I might share the video through the chat channel. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lapalian. And now we go to Mrs. Claire Melamed. Are you with us in this session?
I am, thank you very much. So our mandate as an organisation is to work on data and information that will help governments to help some of those vulnerable communities and deliver social cohesion. And of course, this is all the more important in a time of the pandemic. We were invited by the UN Economic Commission for Africa in March to work with them on developing partnerships so that governments, particularly across Africa, could have access to the data and the technology and the tools that would help them to deliver the right responses to COVID. And particularly, I want to talk about Sierra Leone, a country we've been working in for several years. And of course, in a country like Sierra Leone, which has, serious big social issues, economic issues, and a lot of people who are often missing from the data. If a government can't see you in the data that it uses to make decisions, it can't help you. So we pulled together a number of different companies, and using the power of the internet, we're able to combine data sources. So data from surveys, from census, also from satellite imagery, from mobile phone companies, and combine that. And of course, it's when you combine data that the real magic happens and you're able to create that 3D picture of a society. So we were able to deliver to Sierra Leone the most granular data that they've ever had on the population, and really helped the government to understand where the vulnerabilities are, where people are most in need of help. And of course, now that we have the good news about vaccines and other developments, it's going to allow that help to get to the most vulnerable people much faster. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I congratulate you all for this efficient action into the digital technology to bring it to the developed countries, developed population. And now we get into the heart of the debate of our session. Let me ask you questions inherent in the specifics related to the activities of each of our guests. And each of our guests is kindly invited to answer the question that will be asked in 4 minutes. Please don't exceed them. And my first question will be addressed to our guest, not from Italy. Mrs. Paula is absent too. To Mrs. Fomzai Mlambo Nguka from the United Nations Women Executive Director. A report by the Web Foundation on digital gender equality highlighted that women around the world still face multiple barriers, much more than men, in accessing the internet. The report also highlighted the need to look beyond access, but also ensure that women and girls can use the internet in a meaningful way. What does such a meaningful internet use mean to you? And why is this important, especially in context of the internet as driver for social development?
Thank you very much for that questions. Let me first congratulate my colleagues and friends at the World Web Foundation for this very thoughtful report. Women and girls need access to the internet in order to address their challenges and development needs. As we speak now, there isn't equal access to the internet. Digital divide is a reality. 1.7 billion women in the global south are not connected, as well as the fact that roughly 327 million fewer women than men have a smartphone and an access to a mobile internet. Again, I ask that we try to use the products and the gadgets that people have. So we must keep thinking about the people who do not have the internet, while we are increasing those who are connected. The meaningful use of the internet at the hour we are in now is the enabling access to digital education as well as remote education. I think I don't have to explain this to this group. We know how much it is causing a problem. There are some other children whose education has continued while we have been under lockdown, and some children whose lives have been at a standstill. Some children who have been exposed to harmful practices such as trafficking, forced marriage, because they have been at home away from a place of safety that the school provides. The possibility of not being connected while we are at home and having work to do has meant that children have been left alone, wandering, especially where there were no adults, caregivers to be with them. The importance of connectivity for women also is access to health information. We know that when women get connected, they are known to search mostly for health-related information and for information to help them with doing their online business, no matter how small. That is actually quite significant because that is one way of addressing and averting poverty of women. And thirdly, access to finance. In countries, Kenya is a special case where digital finance has penetrated significantly. Women were biggest beneficiaries. It reduced poverty because women were able both to control their own income and financial resources, but also to reduce the traveling that they needed in order to go and seek for finance, and they had cash in order to invest in their small businesses. To be excluded from internet connectivity is to be shut down out of the 21st century, and that has ghastly results on the lives of people, because this is a service that is so huge in our lives at this moment. If we are to have equality, there has to be equal access to this service that is digital. And that is why I would regard it as a human right, not as a luxury. Thank you.
Thank you. The clarifications provided by Mrs. Fumzile Malombo Neguka as to this battery of measures that should be taken, especially in countries disadvantaged by the technological tide at the level of many, many countries around the world, and the prospect that this can open up to women carrying ideas and projects with different aims are very useful. It should allow to discriminalize millions of women around the world that many socioeconomic, political factor prevents to enjoy, otherwise simply accept this key for a better future life. And now, Mr. Longley, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, you are the Director General. My question is the following. One of UNIDO's goals is to help advance inclusive and sustainable industrial development. In your view, what is the value of digital innovation in contributing to such inclusive and sustainable development across sectors and industries, as well as in multi-stakeholder partnership between public and private sector and with the civil society?
Thank you very much. Let me begin with three numbers. First is access to the internet. I think the access to digital technology for European household is 86.5%, 17.8% for Africa, and globally the 53.6%. And also many of the information regarding educational opportunity and digital manufacturing capacity. I do not want to mention too many of those factors. Big challenge facing by the global community and also by UNIDO, how to reduce the digital divide and also incapability between advanced country and developing country. Those are critical challenge for us. I believe that UNIDO is doing something innovatively. We support the country's government to develop an industrial strategy which covers digitalization, fourth industrial revolution technologies. We develop a program for country partnership focusing on the industrial strategy. Now more than 10 countries in Africa Morocco, Egypt, Senegal, Ethiopia, etc. And one in Asia, one in Central CIS country, and LAC region also. Because this is an important process to support the government to develop important strategy, to develop digital infrastructure investment also. Second part is our TC programs actually really bring the new technology created by the new industrial revolution and digital technology. For instance, we help a country to develop manufacturing with a more efficient way and a safer way through the artificial intelligence and Internet of Things to achieve the sustainable city. And the 3D printing also can help us provide a sustainable housing. Those are the important approach for our TC programs. As I mentioned, in agriculture sector, we widely use the digital technology. Of course, COVID-19 actually gave us a good opportunity to help our member countries build back better, how to actually prevent the infections. Digital technology, artificial intelligence already being widely applied. And also private sector, we support the private sector because robotics, virtual reality can help the private sector remove from much of the danger from the factory operations, reducing industrial safety risks. And also we are aware that potentially negative implications of the new digital workspace for physical mental health. Those are the some specific area we work with private sector. Also, we strongly support the digital technology to help the social, to achieve the social inclusion and the well-being. As I mentioned that the education of the technology related to the digital technology, digital education, we use the platform for the visual reality training, especially for women, for young people, because it really will bring lots of new jobs and get rid of some of the jobs will be suffering for the women, but at the same time, they will get a new slot of the new jobs. This is one of the specific area we are working. And also, I just would like to say that for global agenda, we are also very innovatively, that's climate change as a big issue. But look at the industrial development. 1/3 of the emission actually derived from the industry manufacturing. And energy, 30% of power used by the manufacturing. So during this process, how to achieve green industry, reduction of emission from the manufacturing activity is so important for us. So we promote new technologies like cleaner production centers, renewable energy centers to support our member country develop technology necessary to support the climate change issue. So green industry, decarbonization of the industry is our global agenda. So having said that, I just would like to conclude. UNIDO committed strongly to the international partnership with our member countries, governments, private sector, civil society, and we would like to continue this process to achieve the new developments to build back better and SDG goal, climate change global agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So including all peoples around the world in this development effort could be useful in the sense of wealth creation, including private operators and civil society actions will be targeted and consistent and will involve a large part of vulnerable societies and or complex in this general development effort. Thank you for this perspective that you have opened up. And my next question will go to Ms. Gabriela Ramos. Ms. Gabriela Ramos, what are the possible risks to be aware of when developing and deploying digital solutions in emergency situations such as COVID-19, and what can be done to mitigate these risks, notably in terms of protecting human rights? What are UNESCO's concrete actions or strategies to address the possible challenges and inequality that the development and deployment of digital technologies bring to light? Please, Mrs. Ramos.
Thank you so much. But let me start by saying that controlling the risk of the digital transformation, but also the artificial intelligence, which is at the core of these technologies, is not only a challenge for emergency situations. We are in the context, even before the pandemic, when we knew that the rule of law that needs to exist online is still in construction. And many of the rules and the institutional setting and the tools that we have developed offline, the enforcement of laws, the redressing mechanisms, the allocating of responsibilities and accountability issues in terms of the decision making in governments and private institutions are still in real need to be built up in the internet. And we still don't have a common understanding of how to move into this. Some of the major players like the US have focused more on light touch regulation, favoring innovation and having a more voluntary standards for the industry, while some other regions like Europe are more concerned about security and safety. And therefore, there's also a need of a common approach internationally to deal with these issues. Now, it is true that with COVID and with the massive movement into the online for solutions in terms of the pandemic with the track, trace, and the test, track and trace technologies that is getting into massive gathering of data. With the teleworking, we know that in some countries that had 7% teleworking, now we have around 50%. With the teleschooling, the same. The infrastructure and the access to these technologies have been really massive moving into line. The SMEs and the restaurants and all the industry that have been locked down are using these technologies to survive. So I agree with some of the panelists. It's great to have them. But at the same time, if you don't have the protocols that you have offline in terms of when do you stop treating this information for the pandemic and when do you do not turn it into mass surveillance or for other purposes, it's very important to have this global common agreement on how to deal with the regulatory frameworks. And this is something that UNESCO, actually, we were very pleased because our member states, I think they have this possibility of foreseeing that probably this was necessary. But in 2019, they asked UNESCO to develop the very first global standard on ethics of artificial intelligence. And I have to say that we are benefiting from the work that has been done in UNESCO on many areas on the universality of internet and the literacy and issues of skills for mastering these technologies. But for the development of this recommendation that has been multi-stakeholder and also developed with the Global South, that is not as represented as it should in these technologies, we of course stated that the whole purpose of these technologies should be the respect of human rights, the enhancement of human rights and human dignity, and actually the development of new human rights that we may need in the internet and in the digital world. But the fact is that we did not stop there. The 24 experts that developed this instrument, because there has been so much movement in the regulatory frameworks internationally, they also ask UNESCO not only to define what we're looking at, but also what tools can we use, what principles, as I said, the transparency, the accountability, the redressing mechanism, the proportionality, all these issues that you all know, the governance of data. Still, we are lagging behind on how do we govern data, how do we ensure that the owner of the data is the individual and that he's not subjected to the misuse of his data for commercial purposes or other purposes. And therefore, they also ask us to go for very concrete policy solutions in the field of UNESCO, which is education, culture, communication, and sciences, and social inclusion, but in general, also to look at what tools can be developed. And I'm glad to share with all of you and with the public that is watching us that we are also going to develop an ethical impact assessment, because I think this is very important. It's not only about the digital divides on gender, as Funsile has mentioned, or the impact on the environment, but it's also in the whole life cycle of the artificial intelligence deployment in terms of the research, development, deployment, measurement of impact, and the black box and the machine learning, all these things. We really need to have a tool that will help us embed the ethical thinking and the questions, the right questions that we need to do to ensure that these impressive and amazing technologies deliver for good and not for wrongdoing.
Thank you very much. So investing in science, technology, and innovation is essential for the economic prosperity and social progress of all humanity, especially this part of humanity in question that is completely devoid of its currently research and development in the field of green technologies, for example, contribute to economic and social progress and allow to set up green economic paths that are ecological, and you have explained this UNESCO intervention schema in this particular context, especially at the level of countries that are largely atrophied from these new technologies. Thank you very much, and my question will go to Mr. Mario Simoli. Mr. Mario Simoli, Latin America and the Caribbean has a digital agenda under the coordination of ICLEC. How can a regional digital market help address the problems of poverty and inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean? And how can digital technologies support social inclusion and development in Latin America and Caribbean?
Gracias, gracias por la pregunta. Los procesos son fundamentales. No nos olvidemos nunca que estas tecnologías, y esto es un punto que hay que tenerlo bien en consideración, no es que producen siempre resultados positivos. La utilización de estas tecnologías puede también producir resultados de desigualdad, de concentración, de marginación. De por sí no es porque se adopta la tecnología, el modelo se hace mucho más uniforme y la gente está más uniforme. Por eso hay que repensarla desde ese punto de vista para tener un proceso de mayor inclusión. Por ejemplo, lo que necesita América Latina es un mercado digital mucho más amplio, mucho más grande. Cada país por sí mismo es muy chico y cada país por sí mismo no lo va a lograr si no hay un mercado que es un mercado del mismo idioma, la misma lengua, mismos procesos para poder manejar los procesos de integración de las pymes, de exportación, de procesos de intercambio comercial, o sea, un mercado digital con estándares, regulación y acceso también con vinculación con el sector financiero para utilizar todo el modelo de pagamento de tarjeta, permite a América Latina incluir mucho más. Cuando América Latina se incluye, entonces la solución es crear un modelo donde las pymes, los sectores que construyen nueva empresarialidad y los otros proyectos pueden acceder a mercado. Lo importante es construir un mercado digital donde las más grandes economías de la región y la más pequeña vivan de una escala de producción que permita incluir mucho más. El mercado por un lado, y la otra cosa que es importante tomar en cuenta es que no hay inclusión si no se hace también participar al sistema productivo. Y por eso toda la integración de pyme, MIPYME, sectores informales se hace crucial. En la medida que la economía puede incorporarlos a ellos, vamos a tener un logro de inclusión y de mayor productividad. Pero eso requiere políticas públicas, requiere una participación fuerte del gobierno, requiere políticas industriales y políticas tecnológicas asociados a resolver el problema de la inclusión y del mejor estado de la producción en América Latina. Mayor productividad y mayor inclusión requiere la expansión del mercado, la incorporación de las empresas y un proceso productivo mucho más acelerado. Muchísimas gracias.
So thank you, Mr. Simoli. So putting in play the mechanism of sustainable development that will involve international trade and integration by introducing these populations to managerial concepts and putting in place effective intervention plans that can positively address the ecological and employment disparities in this important part of the world. Thank you, Mr. Simoli, and let me now ask Mr. Andrew Sullivan the following question. Mr. Sullivan, what are the fundamental properties of the Internet that allow it to be the basis of social development?
Thank you. I think this is the heart of the question, at least from my point of view, because the internet has been obviously super important in human development since it burst on the scene and in recent years, and it's been super important for us during this pandemic. And I think this is because of some basic qualities that the internet provides. The internet is an unusual technology. We talk about it as though it's a single thing, but it's made up of many different networks. It's made up of individual networks that are operated according to the individual priorities of those individual network operators. But it uses this common underpinning that is the way in which all of these different networks collaborate with one another. And this collaboration turns out to provide certain advantages that no other networking technology has provided. And we at the Internet Society, we like to call this the Internet way of networking. It provides these mechanisms of decentralized control, of shared building blocks, little building blocks that can be reused for other purposes. It has this common language of protocols, and it creates an organic and open expansion of interconnectivity because you get innovation without having to get permission from any central authority. Those are the fundamental properties that give us the advantages that the internet provides. It allows new ideas to come to the fore without a great deal of centralized planning. And that has meant sometimes, of course, disadvantages. It has meant that there have been inventions that we find disadvantageous, but it also means that it gives us the freedom to deliver new opportunities and new social development and new economic development for people. It's what has allowed us to develop a technology that allowed, for instance, the example I was talking about earlier of the funeral that had to take place over the internet. What we're seeing is that because of the challenges that people are facing with the internet, gradually there's been a tendency towards different kinds of regulation, and those different kinds of regulation do not always take into account the special nature of the architecture of the internet. And that means that we could, by accident, lose the advantages that the internet brings to us. We could do it just through well-meaning, well-intentioned attempts to try to solve the problems that we encounter. We could use the wrong tools for the job. Now, when we try to do physical development in the world, for instance, if you try to build a road or a pipeline or an airport or anything like that, we do an environmental impact assessment. Most societies do that in order to decide, hey, is this a good idea? And so the Internet Society has developed a similar tool for the internet. We have developed this Internet impact assessment tool, and that allows similar sorts of evaluation of policy proposals in order to decide whether a given approach to solving social problems is the one that's going to be most advantageous for the rest of the development of the internet, or whether it will be harmful to it. So that is a tool that can be used in order to ensure that social development can continue through the internet. There's no question that this is one of the most human technologies that has ever been invented. The internet is here because it's to connect people. It's not just to have some sort of fun technological toy. It's been successful because it provides us with all of these benefits. And we need to remember that, and we need to make sure that decisions that we take about how to develop it as things go forward do not undermine the very thing that has brought us all of these advantages. And that's the reason that I think, we need to do those kinds of impact assessments whenever we try to make a policy that's going to affect the way the internet is, because otherwise we will lose the social development that we can get through the internet simply by getting out of the way of people who have a problem and they have an idea for how to solve it. That has been the history of the best parts of the development on the internet. And I think that that is the way we should continue forward, because the internet puts the power in the hands of the people who have the problem. That's the best place to solve those problems.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Sullivan. And we should have to have equal access to these technologies around the world. And we were talking with you about the disparities existing in this context. But that does not prevent makes a common action in the direction of promoting this technology in the countries that need it most. My next question is addressed to Mr. Arunaba Ghosh. Mr. Arunaba Ghosh, how can developed and developing countries alike leverage digital technologies to ensure that everyone, including vulnerable groups, have access to electricity and clean water even in times of emergency?
Thank you for that question. And since I wasn't introduced right at the outset, let me just state that I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is based here in India, but we work in other emerging economies as well. In response to your question, let me outline 4 specific ideas that have become even more relevant in the course of the pandemic and the kind of sustainable and just recovery that we expect out of it. The first, of course, is the access to energy for not just power consumers in general, but particularly vulnerable groups, and how could digitization and the internet help to do that, especially in the context of a pandemic. One of the things that is happening increasingly is that for remote communities, there is a strong potential for what are called peer-to-peer payments through digital accounts, and using blockchain as a way to ensure that those last mile transactions and last mile markets for energy trading actually get developed. This then permits the development of mini grid based energy access technologies, but also connecting the mini grids in far-flung places to larger grid infrastructure. In India, one utility here in Delhi, where I am based, is the first distribution company that has used the technology to trial a peer-to-peer solar-based trading. So you're now using clean energy, you're using digitization, and you're targeting vulnerable and poor communities to ensure that the last mile infrastructure is able to deliver energy services. And this trial is being tried out for about 6 megawatts of existing solar infrastructure. But even more excitingly, our largest state, Uttar Pradesh, which has a population of more than 200 million and larger than most countries in the world, is the first state in India that has now got a regulatory framework to enable controlled peer-to-peer energy trading via blockchain as a mechanism to make those energy markets much more efficient. In fact, it would be the first in the world to be able to do that at a provincial level. That's one example. Another example is, how do we respond in an emergency situation? The pandemic, of course, is one kind of emergency, but as another colleague on this panel was mentioning, climate change is another severe and rising emergency that we're all faced with. Now, during extreme weather events, how do we ensure that we can use more digitization to ensure that the most vulnerable and impacted communities are supported? So my organization, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, has proposed an integrated emergency surveillance system that would, on one hand, combine an active database of disaster emergency hotspots, and overlay that with a climate risk atlas with geotagged interfaces for critical infrastructure. no such climate risk atlas exists anywhere in the developing world. And if we were able to create that, then at a high resolution level, we'd be able to identify exactly how extreme weather events are unfolding or are likely to unfold. And that then links to a third component, which is to have a real-time monitoring system to be able to guide the emergency services for post-emergency restoration. As the UN itself identifies that investment in emergency preparedness gives you $2 return in terms of lives saved and livelihood saved against every dollar invested. And that could result in billions of dollars of savings for vulnerable countries facing climate emergencies. A third area is how we can protect small farmers using digitization. In India, for instance, a lot of the irrigation water comes from under the ground through groundwater, even though there is a big gap between the surface irrigation potential that is being created versus what is being used. This means that there's low returns on the high capital investment in the surface irrigation. Again, if we could use a network of wireless sensors via Internet of Things to monitor the soil water content and the soil nutrients, then the surface irrigation infrastructure could be used much more efficiently and deliver the right amount of water supply to, especially to small and marginal farmers. In fact, again, in the context of the pandemic, it's the agricultural sector in India that is demonstrating resilience, even as the urban economies are suffering severely. So the more we can help them and the more we can help small farmers, it's important. And finally, my fourth idea is to deal with micro, small, and medium enterprises. Again, the colleague from UNIDO gave some very good examples of why that is an important sector to support, and even the colleague from Latin America talked about this. We have proposed something called an MSME information system for holistic and real-time identification, incentives, and support. This would be a systematic online platform that would get data on the more than 60 million micro, small, and medium enterprises in the country, to be able to combine information on their energy usage, to be able to combine information on their outputs, as well as the tax collections, but also link it to the people employed, so that in emergencies, again, any kind of direct benefits could be transferred to those enterprises or to their employees. So whether it is the issue of access to energy by creating viable payment systems for mini grids and distributed energy payments, whether it is developing an integrated emergency surveillance system, whether it is supporting small farmers with data and the way to monitor the irrigation that they're using, or whether it is to support millions of micro, small, and medium enterprises, the role of digitization, blockchain, Internet of Things, and a viable information system that brings in the focus on vulnerable would be the right way to build back better. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. So India's experience in this context is very attractive, very constructive, and really effective. It will be beneficial to adopt the main axioms at the level of countries whose populations are in situation of massive vulnerability, to draw inspiration from this approach in order to improve the daily lives of their populations by using new technologies. Thank you very much, Mr. Arunaba. And my next question goes to Mr. Josh Calmer. This is my question for you, Mr. Josh. Going back to the discussion on digital inclusion, how can tech companies work together with governments and other stakeholders to ensure that this becomes a reality in the near future? I'm hearing you. We are hearing you.
Thank you, Ibtisam, and it's wonderful to be with all of you. I would focus on the example of education as an area where companies really have the opportunity to partner with governments and other non-governmental stakeholders in general. Just say that so many times tech companies and companies in general see interactions with governments through sort of a defensive lens. What are the risks we face to our business? How can we avoid bad things from happening? And they miss the opportunity to invest in trust relationships and to explore areas of partnership that would really redound to the benefit, not just of governments, not just of companies, but of the world. And I think education is a perfect example of that. I wouldn't be a good representative of my company, Zoom, if I didn't talk a little bit about our product, but I think it is one of the main ways that we could advance shared goals for government and business and our kids. So one thing that we did when the pandemic happened is we made the judgment that education was going to be moving remotely very quickly, and there are a lot of parts of the world for whom digital technologies may be out of reach, either for technical reasons or financial reasons or both. We're now supporting over 125,000 schools with free service around the world and looking to intensify. But really giving away things for free or selling things to the government isn't what we're talking about, I don't think, when we're talking about these partnerships. I think the most important thing is that whether it's a Zoom in a video conferencing area or whether it's any tech company, is to really understand the needs, the priorities, the values of the governments and the societies in which they operate, and not just to respond to them, but to align ourselves with them, to embrace those values and priorities as our own and to work together to find ways to meet them. So very practically speaking, in the area of education, it's not just about selling Zoom or giving Zoom away for free, although that may be a piece of it. It's understanding what do teachers in this country, whatever it is, need to be successful in using these kinds of technologies? How do we equip them to keep their classrooms, their virtual classrooms, safe? How do we design the product in a way that anticipates the needs that they may have? Gabriella was speaking earlier about control over data. How do we make sure that we're protecting personal privacy, kids' privacy, and also ensuring that bad actors don't come onto the platform? And so there are just a whole range of things having to do with the values and the priorities of the economies in which tech firms operate, that tech firms like Zoom, like others, need to embrace, need to internalize, and need to build into how we make our products, how we design our services, and how we interact with governments. We're going to be, to speak a little bit about our company, we are at the very beginning of a journey that I'm putting together to develop these kinds of partnerships with governments around the world. And that's one reason it's such a privilege to be a part of this group today. But we will, we take the challenge very seriously. We're looking forward to it. And we're very committed to developing these kinds of partnerships so that tech companies and governments and NGOs and other stakeholders can really be rowing in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's true that it will take a lot of effort to start with the work well thought out, well done, continuous, and above all, to trust each other and put in place effective driving schema that should guarantee the rights of all to a fair prosperity, then sustainable. Thank you, Mr. Kalmer. And my next question will be addressed to Mr. Ridi Lapalanian. Mr. Ridi Lapalanian, Fingo's main goal is to contribute to building a fairer world for all. What are the main challenges to building such a world from a social development perspective? And what does it take to make sure that digital technologies can help address these challenges as opposed to amplifying them?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thanks for the question. Smartphones caused a huge disruption almost everything in our lives. And the radical transparency, the rapid possibility of the real-time communication, and the multiplication of information created a new reality to which companies, organizations, and societies continue to try to adapt. The change is comparable in the scale to the emergence of printing skills, and we are only at the beginning of that change. The return of the concentration of power authoritarian leaders and a powerful state to the force that characterize the global operating environment can be seen. And at the same time, there's also the strong counter-trend that challenges the concentration of power and the competition for great power. There have emerged actors who have no official power, but who are capable of challenging the power of states and even the global order. And at the same time, the people's individual influence continues to grow with the new communication technologies. The power of states mixed with a complex operating environment where the group of individuals or the movement formed around one thing can challenge the debate and the familiar hierarchy of power. Overall, the exercise of power becomes more difficult as more actors are able to exercise the power. However, the decentralization of power also provides unprecedented opportunities to bring to the global agenda the issues that arise from people's needs and aspirations in relation to their own security. And for example, in peace talks, there are weak signals that the agendas are changing the interest of the great powers towards the own needs of the local people and a common dialogue. And through the participation and inclusion, lasting stability can be created on the terms that people genuinely need. It is essential for the governments, companies, organizations to understand these ways of influencing. They also need to create new means to respond to the crises created by the change situation. And in the Edelman Trust Barometer Global Trust Survey, as many as 76% of people were worried about using the fake news as an attack on society. Almost all of our operations are connected in one way to another to the platforms provided by the smartphones. And platforms not only accept our actions and what we do as they are, but their logic also guides people's actions in line with the logic of the platforms. And it is therefore justified to talk about the platform societies nowadays. Internet activists Jeremy Hymas and Henry Timms have created an interesting practical division between the new and the old power. And the traditional power is closed, it is not easy to access, and when it is obtained, its use is strictly regulated. Such power can be compared, for example, to money. The new power, in turn, works differently. It is symbolically like flowing water. It arises when enough people participate. It is open, inclusive, and being empowered by peers. Like a flowing river, it is at its strongest when it floods. The sign of the new power, it is not the ability to retain and exercise of power, but to involve people around the issue and channel the resulting movement. In addition to content creation, the new exercise of power also includes content sharing, editing, financing, production, and co-ownership. And the traditional institutions and intermediaries such as banks or newspapers or representative democracy are ignored. Thus, this power is not only redistributed, but also empowers people into actors in the fields where it has not previously been possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I just want to say that lots of things has changed by this pandemic, and we have to learn other ways to imagine the life in different countries of the world. Thank you, Mr. Rili Lapalian. And my last question is addressed to Miss Claire Melamed. Mrs. Claire Melamed, it is probably safe to say that at the moment, the potential of data to contribute to sustainable development is not fully tapped into. What policies can governments and the private sector put in place to allow data to be used for social good? And succeeding, yes, please answer. We are all hearing you.
Thank you very much. And let me say, first of all, I completely agree that it is absolutely safe and very true to say that at the moment we're not using all of the data and the resources that are available to analyze data in the best way for the public good. And of course, that is perhaps bad news from the point of view of the quality of decision making now, but it also presents an exciting opportunity around what we can do to improve the situation. So we work with governments around the world on bringing together the public and the private sectors to answer, to tackle specific challenges that are limited, where lack of data is limiting progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And from that experience over several years now, and having brokered over 70 partnerships, some at a very specific national or local level and some regional or global, I think for us, there are a number of things that stand out that really have to happen if data is to make its full contribution, and data particularly from some of the resources and technologies that we have now, thanks to the internet and digital technologies. The first, of course, as always in almost any area of public policy, is political leadership, and that being seen through into the creation of a regulatory framework that will create the possibility for a positive interaction. Of course, in the area of digital, that has to set a fair market competition, and critically, as we see again and again around the world, that has to build public trust. We've seen many data projects that fail because people don't give their consent, because they don't allow governments to enact laws or to begin projects that may be beneficial, because they sometimes rightly don't trust that the government will protect their data, will protect them, and instead they fear that it will be used to harm them in some way. So the first policies that need to be put in place is a framework that will guarantee trust, that will create fair competition, and that most importantly will guarantee public trust. But it doesn't end there. Too often we think about policy as the beginning and also the end of the process. And I think what we see again and again is that it's not just about policy, but it's also about some quite deep cultural changes that have to happen within institutions. Too often within government, data is seen as something that has to be hoarded. Government departments don't even want to share data with each other. So I think the first thing that has to happen is a kind of cultural change to say, look, data isn't something that you have to keep and it's the source of your power. In fact, data becomes more powerful the more it's shared and the more it's combined with other data sources to be used in different ways. That's a very fundamental culture change that needs to happen, first of all, within governments, but also I think I would love to see that happen within markets as well. That market behavior and market incentives would reward companies that created tools and platforms that enabled interoperability and data sharing, rather than creating kind of walled gardens where once you're locked into one product, you can only ever use that product. Of course, companies need to pursue their quite legitimate pursuit of profit, but I would love to see the market evolving in a way where consumers could encourage companies to find ways to combine profit with a much stronger drive towards interoperability and combining data sources. So I think really what we need to see is, first of all, policy change to set the framework. Secondly, cultural change to set those good things in motion. And then the third thing, I think, is the democratization of data production and use, and actually a much stronger sharing of the tools and capacities and the ability and the confidence. I think we probably all remember moments in our school days where, if not us, then somebody else was, oh, I can't do maths, oh, I'm terrible at this. I would love to see that kind of culture disappear and everybody feel that they have the tools and the confidence to use this data. Data shouldn't just be something that is done to people, but something that they can positively interact with themselves to define their own reality and set their own terms and make their own decisions. So for me, the three key things here are first of all, a strong policy environment to guarantee security. Secondly, a culture change that drives interoperability and sharing. And thirdly, democratization, so that we all have the ability to use these amazing tools that are now at our disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have to build to set this entanglement two-jet relationship economically beneficial to all parties, both governmental and private in order to create a sensitive and sustainable prosperity of the people in the greatest challenge that seems important to us to meet by all. Thank you all for this very fruitful exchange around this very important topic on the role of the internet and new technologies in the creation of sustainable development. And well, we come to the final question of our session that I will ask you all. I wish ask you each to answer in 1 minute, and I will start with Minister Paola Pisani is not with us, so I start with our guest, Mrs. Paola. What are the commitments you take into this session? Mrs. Claire.
Sorry, you cut out there.
Please state what specific.
I wasn't able to hear the question.
Please state one specific recommendation on what should be done to ensure that the internet is a force for social good. Please choose one of these stakeholder groups for this recommendation for concrete action, either government, private sector, the civil society, or the United Nations system.
Thank you. Well, I already talked about governments and the private sector, so let me just now close the loop by also saying for civil society, what I feel as someone who is very much involved with governments and companies in the, particularly at the data end, is sometimes a lack of engagement by civil society. And I would love to see a much stronger engagement by civil society defining the internet and the protections that they would like to see. Not that necessarily that would what would happen or that everybody would agree, but I think a much stronger voice for civil society would help to drive everybody in the right direction and give those governments that want to act the legitimacy and the support to do so, and also change at the margins, help to shift markets towards positive outcomes for all. So I would love to see a stronger voice for civil society, not always opposing, but saying what they want to see, giving us a positive agenda for this area. Thank you.
Thank you. I ask now Mrs. Fumzila Mbinambonguka to give us her voluntary commitment to support the internet for social good. In 1 minute, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would actually like to see regulatory interventions that are both encouraging and supportive to government supporting the efforts of both private sector, civil society, communities, as well as greater private sector, public sector collaboration in enabling those who live in technology poor communities to have access. And I would also like more investment in building a pipeline of young people through STEM subjects who would have an appetite and an interest to participate effectively in the world that technology promises. In other words, an ecosystem that is mutually reinforcing from different sectors, role players, that is all aimed at increasing the uptake and participation at affordable or no cost, which is open source. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yongli, please.
Thank you. I think from my experience for the past few years of the digital technology development, fourth industrial revolution, I think one of the issue is just like a bottleneck for the digital technology is digital infrastructure. I have a strong feeling that the government should play the key role working together with private sector, private company to develop a digital infrastructure, just like highway, railway, airways. Without the digital infrastructure, all those new technologies cannot be run. And even the vocational trainings through the visual reality training system and cannot be applied. This is a fundamental issue. I believe that the government should play the role, and the development financial institution provide assistance, and private sector will be one of the key players. This is a fundamental issue when we talk about the digital infrastructure, digital technologies, application of that, reducing the digital divide. Thank you very much.
Mr. Yongi, thank you very much. And now I address the same question to Madame Gabriela Ramos.
Well, our commitment and our hope, because we are an international institution, is that the instruments that we have developed and the instruments that we are developing, like the recommendation of ethics of artificial intelligence. But before, I have to say that in 2015, we have the Internet Universality Framework. We contributed to the Secretary General roadmap with the 3 CCs on artificial intelligence to connect, to protect, to respect, and remedy. So we have many tools that have been advanced for the purpose of what we have been discussing today, which is to put the people at the center of these technologies, not only for them to master the technologies and to protect their own rights and their human dignity, but also for them to shape the technological revolution. I think this is very important, and so we will really make our instruments count, and we will work with people, with the stakeholders, to make sure that they are empowered not only to use and have access to the technologies, which is the first derivative of the digital divide, but more importantly, to shape the technological revolution, not to have all these minorities absent, not to have all these women absent, not to have the global South absent. I think it's very important that they understand the real benefits that these technologies bring, but how they need to shape it and how they need to protect themselves to advance their own rights. So hopefully UNESCO will continue making a strong contribution in this field.
Thank you very much, Madame Gabriela. Thank you, UNESCO. And we are what's having to say for us in the same context, Mr. Mario Simoli.
Gracias, muy amables. La propuesta es muy inmediata. Pensamos que en una situación de crisis grave como la que hay, los gobiernos, conjuntamente con una cooperación con el privado, tienen que garantizar una canasta, un basket, digital para todas las poblaciones y para todos los grupos más emarginados, informal y lo demás. En ese basket tendría que estar los instrumentos, una conexión digital potente. Para gran parte de la población, 40%, poder tener ese paquete o ese basket o esa canasta para que puedan acceder sería muy importante. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Gracias. And your commitment, Mr. Andrew Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, are you with us?
I am. I'm sorry. The translation was talking over you. So, thank you so much. The Internet Society wants people to be able to do the evaluations that they need to in order to figure out whether various policies are the right ones. So we will continue to develop case studies of the of various policies in order to determine how they fit with the internet way of networking. And we're very happy to work with anybody in the world who wants to do those analyses of various proposed policies. So that's the commitment that we're willing to make right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arunabha Ghosh. We're waiting for your commitment.
Thank you. As one of Asia's leading policy institutions working on sustainability, our focus has been to democratize data, and that is our commitment. In the last 10 years, we have made more than 100 data sets, either created them or made them available.
We lost Mr. Arunabha. So
Hi, can you hear me?
Mr. Arunabha, are you
Yes, can you hear
with
me?
us? Yes, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying that our main commitment is to make access to data as much as possible available to the public at large. We have either created or made more than 100 data sets on access to energy, water, industrial production and emissions, etc., available everywhere so that that can be used for incisive policy interventions. That commitment will continue, but our ask of governments is to ensure that data that is generated by civil society is granted the kind of status that is needed, because often that's where there is a lot more detailed and granular information available. And especially when we talk about creating things like a climate risk atlas that can save millions of lives affected by extreme weather events over the coming decades. That's the kind of visioning that we need for a democratized data architecture that is then delivered to both the public at large, but also the government services that need to respond to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And as the last word, your commitment, Mr. Josh Calmer.
Great, thank you. I of course can't speak for other companies in the tech sector, but on behalf of Zoom, we can commit, and we do commit to always working to internalize the priorities and values of governments, to designing our products in ways that take those values and priorities into account, and in giving people tools to use them safely and securely. One recommendation I have, going back to the education context, is actually to put something together and to have the UN perhaps convene, say, by the end of the first quarter of 2021, a half-day symposium bringing together tech companies, governments, non-governmental stakeholders, to start working through, perhaps in the context of education in particular, ways that we can really drive inclusion together and to start actually taking practical steps to do so. I know Zoom would be an enthusiastic participant in such a setting, and so I will put that idea out there for you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Josh Calmer. And now we go to Mr. Lili Lapalian. What's your last commitment, Mr. Lapalian?
I think there are 2 points. The first is coming back to the civil society, which I'm representing. And I think that we have quite a lot of work to do still internally. So really sharing about the examples, really making our promises and making the implementation of the principles for the development, digital development. So really homework, co-creation, really learning by doing and all of that. But then on the other hand, I'm really having the request for, especially for the governments, so that exactly there is the access for the civil society to participate, because it's not really happening in every countries. And I think that there's a lot of data, for example, like we heard, that the civil society is collecting, which could be really, really relevant and useful for the governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all. And at the end, before we close this session, I just want to say something. It's my commitment, if you want, in French language. So, because we are in the United Nations, a multilinguist space, I just want to say, il n'est pas douteux que les nouvelles technologies, le progrès numérique, donneront de nouvelles jouissances à l'homme à travers la planète. Et pourquoi pas? Le progrès finira par s'imposer, et ces nouvelles technologies aussi. Ce tout numérique qui s'empare du monde pourrait, au-delà des apparences, permettre l'épanouissement de l'humanité dans le sens positif de la création des valeurs humaines, intemporelles, d'initiative et de réussite. En sommes-nous là? Pas encore, pour des raisons multiples, mais c'est un but, un idéal vers lequel nous marchons, nous, les humains, tous ensemble. Cet échange a été pour nous tous l'occasion de poser les jalons d'un déploiement réel et effectif des nouvelles technologies numériques inventées par l'homme et utilisées par lui-même par les temps durs et les temps heureux, ainsi un outil incontournable de progrès et de développement, mais du reste, beaucoup reste à faire. On aura sûrement l'occasion d'évaluer les actions de chacun d'entre nous lors de prochaines rencontres dans le cadre des forums des Nations Unies. Merci beaucoup à tous. Merci à ceux qui ont pris part à cette session et je vous dis tous à très bientôt. I was very happy to meet you all. Thank you very much. And this session is closed.
Thank you very much, Ibiten, and thank you very much to our panelists. And thank you to the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Pleasure
Goodbye.
to on the discussion. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.